Hi, I'm Miriam Cutelis, and this is a short video on drawing with elementary lines and shapes. A little bit about me. I've been teaching for 21 years. I'm National Board Certified, special ed teacher. You can find me on Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn. I have my own blog on blogspot.com, and I also have my own YouTube channel. I'm going to be sharing lots of different ways in which I use lines and shapes throughout my entire units, and they don't necessarily have to be in drawing, but they are very helpful, and I wanted to share some tips with you. I work with elementary students, so when I see them when they're in kindergarten or first grade, we always start with lines and identifying lines and labeling them, writing them, identifying them in our names, etc. So oftentimes it will just be an exploration and using those lines for our own drawings. White paint on black paper and white chalk on black paper are always lots of fun. Once we are familiar with our lines, we will then use to do other projects. Here, the students are using straight and curvy and thick lines to draw leaves that they collected on a walk. Here, they used very specific lines and patterns to make a quilt. Over here, they created a cyclical pattern using lines and shapes. I've used the same idea with printmaking and scratch foam. Here are the results of the lines and shapes being used on scratch foam to create a cyclical pattern. I've also used markers and drawing with that same idea in mind. Here I've used wire to interpret their drawing. Same thing, just constantly focusing on identifying and being able to name them, I find helps in being able to recreate it in any art media. When it comes to shapes, same thing. We start with identifying shapes, being able to draw them in different ways, triangles, rectangles, circles, and ovals are found all over. This is second grade, and we were making still lives using foods. And once we have created our shapes, we then used color and lines to decorate on top. When I want to teach my students about thickness of line, I oftentimes will work with trees. Trees are excellent in teaching different widths of line, and I will provide them with resources that were printed out, images of printouts that I've created or photocopied, and the students will then use thick, medium, and thin lines to create trees. And this can be done with either a paintbrush and black paint, or it can be done with white paint on black paper. It can be done with chalk. It can be done with markers. So the media is not really that important since they are learning here about the thicknesses of line. Here are some examples. And again, when looking at a class set of artwork, it's really important that there is variety. And in this case, you can see that each child achieved variation of line widths, but their work is still incredibly different and unique. Here's another extension. Some years, if the cherry blossom, we are in DC, in the DC area, and so cherry blossoms are a big deal in the DC area. So we will study widths of line and then add our cherry blossoms with tissue paper. Widths of line is also important when we do printmaking. So a lot of the drawing lessons that we learn through drawing unit are then extended through so many different media, as you've already seen, with the wire sculptures and the printmaking. Right here, the child is drawing on the scratch foam, but in order to create a rich print, they will then have to thicken the lines and sometimes color in the shapes in order to create a print that will be both visible and successful. Next, I want to move into using lines for details. Once we have identified and know our lines and know how they create all the drawings that we see and all the art that we see in the entire world that we are surrounded with, we then realize that we can also use lines to create details. In this specific project, each child used different lines and shapes to decorate their gingerbread houses, therefore detailing their gingerbread houses with lines and shapes. In this case, it would be helpful to have a chart available for them to shop from. And very closely related to details are textures. So one thing that I find very helpful is to use each other as references. So each child got a 5x7 scratch foam, and they broke it up into 9 rectangles or squares. And in each section, they created a different texture using a pen. Once we're done, each student hangs up their artwork in a shared wall. And now each child has access to a library of textures that were created by their peers. Using lines and shapes for texture also helps when drawing animals. And I will often focus on animals because they lend themselves so readily to teaching about textures using lines and shapes. Last, using paint or markers to decorate sculptures and adding texture to them is another way that we use lines and shapes in the art room. I hope this was a helpful video on how lines and shapes are used throughout different units and how drawing is ultimately the supporting structure with a lot of the units that we teach in elementary. Thank you so much for watching. Please don't forget to subscribe to my channel and like this video. If you have a question or comment, do it below. Thanks.